I want to welcome everybody again tonight. I'm Joe Deli Carpini, the Science and Operations Officer, and with me tonight we have a couple of new faces. Kevin Kadima, one of our lead meteorologists, and Tori, our friend Tori, one of our newer meteorologists who's, I guess, kind of rapidly spinning up on our operations. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves briefly here. Kevin, you can go ahead and get started, and then Tori after Kevin.
All right, Joe, thanks. Hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Kadima. I'm one of the lead meteorologists here at the National Weather Service in Norton, or Boston. I started my career out at the National Weather Service in Binghamton. I spent about a year there, and then I transferred to Providence. After about 4 years in Providence, I headed up north to Burlington, Vermont. I spent about 10 years there, and then I've been here at the National Weather Service in Boston for the last 15 years or so. I arrived here in 2005, and I've been here since.
All right, thanks, Kevin. My name is Tori Gosher. I'm a meteorologist here at the National Weather Service as well. I am slightly a little different. I got my feet wet in the broadcast sector. I was actually a TV meteorologist in Eureka, California. I was there for about a year before I jumped over to Burlington, Vermont. So Kevin and I have some roots tied up there. I was in Burlington for just shy of 4 years before I made a brief appearance on some of the local CBS Fox station, WPRI 12 in Providence, before I transferred into the National Weather Service. So yeah, it's been a bit of a ride. Glad to be here. Joe, back to you.
Okay, thanks, guys. And Tori, great to have you aboard. And boy, it's been almost a year now, I think. So, boy, coming up on a year in March, having you on board. So
it'll be a year on March 16th, so almost there.
Crazy, great. Well, we're happy to have you aboard, and thanks both of you for helping out tonight. Good to always have some new faces with us. So here's a look at our list as we get started. We're going to kind of work back in time, starting with the most recent storms, and these are in no particular order. They go kind of backwards in time, starting with the January 2018 blizzard, and we're going to end up with the 1888 blizzard. So in each of these, we'll show a few graphics. Some of them might look familiar from social media, but I also tried to grab some of the weather maps and some of even the forecast discussions and some of the challenges that were associated with each, so you can learn a little bit more about each storm. You may not remember all of them. And at the end, we're going to go through some of those honorable mentions, too. Those were, if I could do 20 of them, I'd do 20, but kind of narrowed it down to this list. And Tori's going to start us off with the more recent storms, and he's going to hand it off to Kevin. And then I'll close it up at the end, especially with some of the honorable mentions. So with that, Tori, I will hand it to you, and you can take it away.
All right, Joe. Once again, my name is Tori Gosher, and we're going to get started here with the January 4th, 2018 blizzard. Many of you will remember this storm being called the bomb cyclone. It got a lot of attention over many of the media channels. And I wanted to kind of go over what a bomb cyclone is. It's really an intensifying area of low pressure. You can see off to the left side of the screen, you've got a bit of a surface map there. You can see where we're circling around it. That was the low moving up towards the north and east. Now, bombogenesis is when the central pressure of a cyclone drops by 24 millibars in 24 hours. And that's what we had going on there, really rapidly intensifying storm. And that storm brought about 10 to 18 inches across much of the region. We do have a snowfall map on the top right-hand side, kind of find the location closest to you, find that color. We see that darker orange color was anywhere from 12 to 15 inches with the pops of red, the 15 to 18 inches of snow. And you can see the some of the heaviest snow kind of developed along a fine line in southeastern Mass. We'll talk about that in a second. But the storm did bring some really gusty winds and some major coastal flooding, and even set a new high water mark record for Boston just by the skin of its teeth there, surpassing the blizzard of 1978. Joe, if we can advance to the next slide, that would be great. So here's a look at the forecast model about 30 hours out before the storm, and what I shouldn't say weeks, I wasn't at the office at the time, but what the forecasters were looking at was where that rain snow line would develop. So on the left-hand side is a forecast model of the precipitation type and intensity, the darker blue indicating some of the heavier snow, lighter blue, light amounts of snow. And there is a fine line you can see there. It's kind of magenta color. That is not I-95, though it is the freezing line. It does hug the I-95 corridor quite well, though. But that's what we were watching to see where that would set up. And obviously, the green is light rain, the yellow indicating some of that more moderate rain, or I should say heavier precipitation, kind of off towards the Cape and Islands. So in the loft, we had to kind of keep an eye out on where our temperatures would be above freezing and below freezing, and that was just setting up maybe about 15 miles to the south and east of where the surface freezing line would be. So warmer air above the Cape and Islands, so we were anticipating less amount of snow there, more in the way of rain. All right, so 2 days out before the storm, our concern once again was where that rain snow line would reach, because that would play a couple different factors: how much snow we would see and the snow to liquid ratio. But one thing that we were, keep saying we, I wasn't here yet, Joe was here though and Kevin was here, what they were really honing in on was that it was looking very confident that we were going to see blizzard conditions because of the high winds, and additionally some significant coastal flooding. In this discussion, we were talking about how much snow we could see. Primarily, they were forecasting 6 to 12 inches. As we saw, there was significantly more, especially because of that rain snow line was a little bit further to the south. But let's advance to the next slide. We can show where that rain snow line was developing on this surface observation map. That white dotted line that cuts Plymouth County in half, skirts through southern Bristol County, indicates where we were seeing that rain snow line. Over the Cape and Islands, it was more mild. Temperatures were in the upper 30s to low 40s. Look at P-Town, 39 degrees. Peak gust was about 40 knots. Nantucket had a temperature of 42 degrees with a peak gust of 49 knots, but you travel on the other side of that line, you were talking temperatures in the low 20s in northern Rhode Island, up into Worcester County, 23 degrees, peak wind gusts at 36 knots with heavy snow. So that right there was giving us blizzard-like conditions, but for blizzard conditions, you need those to persist for at least 3 hours, and you can see many of those locations had visibility. We can look over at Worcester for an example. We can point out where the visibility is, about 1/4 of a mile there. You need 1/4 of a mile and at least sustained winds or frequent gusts to at least 35 miles an hour. So definitely blizzard conditions in that area. All right, and this was the radar just an hour before that. Really significant heavy rain was falling just to the south and east of the rain snow line. But we were also looking at strong forcing just on the north and west side of the freezing line, and that was able to give us some thunder snow that definitely made the news a lot. Able to hear rumbles of thunder, and as we go further north and west, you start to see things slowly taper off in intensity, but it really does pick up in that yellow oval area, showing some mid-level banding, some of those heavier precipitation amounts that were falling across anywhere from northern Worcester County all the way into, say, Hartford County in Connecticut. Additionally, we were concerned about coastal flooding. Moderate to major flooding was forecasted and was about 3-foot storm surge there as well. Taking a look at Boston specifically, looking at Boston specifically, there was a 3-foot storm surge on top of their high astronomical tide, which is 12.1 feet mean low water. Now, that's just a way of us kind of gauging on the elevation for the Boston Harbor. Now, the storm surge did peak about 3 to 3.5 feet and just after high tide, so not the best of time, but if it would have occurred right at high tide, it would have been an even bigger situation. But it was still strong enough, the winds were still strong enough to push in that water and give us a new high water mark established for Boston at 15.16 feet, just by the skin of its teeth, breaking the blizzard of 1978's record of 15.1 feet mean low water. Now, looking onto the center of your screen is a forecast model from the GFS, and it's showing a wide fetch of wind coming in from the east. So that is some significant real estate, and the wind passing over that in the same direction for miles upon miles is pushing all that water into eastern Massachusetts and funneling it into the north and east. And what you see on the left side of your screen is the product of all that wind pushing the water. It's got to go somewhere. Caused some significant flooding inland, caused significant flooding right along the coast, flooding streets, and you can see even a few cars, some of the water up to the roof line, and that is not water you want to be treachery through. Definitely a slushy mess there as the water was freezing over. Now we're wrapping up with 2018, and we're going to go to the Blitz, the Winter Blitz of 2015. I myself I was in California at the time, so I did not get to experience this lovely stretch of weather. But for Boston, 4 major snowstorms in less than 20 days. From the end of January through mid-February, we totaled up somewhere about 77 inches of snow. But for a 30-day period, 2015, we measured 94.4 inches of snow, smashing the old record of 58.8 inches set back in 1978. And now we'll dive into some of those storms of the Winter Blitz. But before we get there, we do want to go over what we typically see. What you're looking at is an average, that black line is the average of all of our winters on how the snow accumulates. Those very light shaded area, light lines, those are all the years kind of compiled on there. But the black line is what the average is. You can see that most of our snow falls from the beginning of January through the end of February. You see where that increasing line is. Then we start to plateau in March. But for the year 2014, 2015, we started things off slowly. We were below average through about the end of January, and then it spiked, jumped right on up because we had all those snowstorms. And we actually became the snowiest winter, surpassing the winter of 1996, where we had about 107.6 inches of snow by the beginning of April. But for the beginning of March, we had surpassed that with 108.6 inches of snow. So definitely a record year for snow. All right, the first major snowstorm of the 2015 Blitz came in the end of January, and really halted a lot of the transportation, anywhere from the roads to the trains to the airports. Things were pretty much brought to a screaming halt. And for the snow itself, you can see areas east of Worcester County and out towards eastern Massachusetts picking up anywhere between 1 and 2 feet of snow. Worcester County, kind of the hot spot there, picking up just shy of 3 feet of snow. Highest totals were down into southern Worcester County as well, also northern Middlesex County, picking up anywhere from about 35 plus inches worth of snow in that darker purple, almost black looking color. But still plenty of snow all fell throughout the region. Boston, 24 inches of snow. Providence, just over 19 inches of snow. But you notice there is a sharp cutoff. Western Massachusetts, Western Connecticut didn't see much in this snowstorm, and even Hartford itself only picked up just over a half a foot of snow. So moving on to February 2nd, we had another major snowstorm fall. Photo captioned in this photo, I believe, is from our meteorologist, Hayden Frank, out in Westboro, Mass, showing that you got one snowstorm plus a second snowstorm. It's really starting to pile that snow up on the deck. Worcester picking up just over 17 inches of snow, Leominster 20 inches of snow, Boston 16 inches of snow. But further south, we saw less in the way of snow. So Providence, down towards the coast, only picking up a few inches, but still plenty of snow falling up in the Boston metro area, with the really the sweet spot falling into northern central portions of Worcester County and northern western Essex County there. Now, between this storm and the 14th, 15th, there was a third storm that fell on the 2nd, and then we got the blizzard of 2015. Now, you're probably looking at the snow totals from the storm thinking, oh, 5 inches in Hartford and maybe a foot in Boston, 10 inches in Worcester. Once again, a blizzard isn't defined by how much snow actually falls. It's defined by the wind, and the visibility. Check out those people walking through the snow. It kind of paints the picture. When you have reduced visibility of 1/4 of a mile, coupled that with winds sustained or frequent gusts at 35 miles an hour for 3 or more hours, that's when you get blizzard-like conditions. For this system, most of that snow kind of fell within the 495 corridor and even down into the coastal areas of Bristol and Plymouth County, picking well up of 1.5 feet to almost 2 feet of snow there. And then, got a lot of blizzards going on. Feels like we're due for one at this point. Talking back all the way now to 2013. Here's a look at 2013, February 8th and 9th, widespread amount of snow. You can see on our snowfall map that showing anywhere from almost 1.5 to 2.5 feet of snow. But the real bullseye for this storm was south and west of Hartford. You can see there in New Haven County picking up 35, 40 inches of snow. Yeah, they saw some incredible snowfall amounts. Not to say we didn't get some incredible snowfall amounts. About 2 feet of snow in Boston, just shy of 2 feet of snow in Hartford, 1.5 feet in Providence, and just over 2 feet in Worcester. So definitely a significant snow maker, causing also the system causing some coastal flooding because of the strong winds, power outages, and some really strong wind gusts. Those peak winds, Cuttyhunk, that is the westernmost Elizabeth Island that's in between, say, New Bedford and Martha's Vineyard, 83 miles an hour. Same thing there in Falmouth, 83 miles an hour. You can see there, wind was definitely a big player in that storm as well, helping to cause those blizzard-like conditions. Now, I believe the next slide should kind of go into the storm itself. Coming off the coast of the Carolinas, it had a central pressure around 994. And as it moved up towards the benchmark, which is 70 degrees west and 40 degrees north, where Joe's circling around, it was starting to strengthen. As you can see, the internal pressure lowering, causing that storm to strengthen as it was moving up into southern New England. Now, up to the right, we're looking at a surface map and a 500 millibar map, both at the same time. You're noticing that the surface low is off to the east of southern New England, kind of off the coast of Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. But the 500 millibar low is further off to the west, so it's not vertically stacked, which is good, because if it was vertically stacked, it would have meant that the storm was weakening and decaying. But since it wasn't, it was still strengthening as it was moving up into the Canadian Maritime, and that's why we were able to get that significant snowstorm and the wind. You can see the pressure gradient force on the backside of that low, and that wind is coming in from the northeast to the southwest, pushing all that water into eastern Massachusetts, where we saw that flooding. Now, for our forecast office, we were 2 days out, and you can see the headlines. We don't often do this unless we're very confident, talking about potentially historic winter storm, blizzard to impact the area with 1 to 2 feet of snow. So when you see us talking about that in our forecast discussion, it's, really good confidence that we're going to have a system like that. But our biggest concern still was the mid-level warming over Rhode Island and Southeast Mass, because once again, that rain-snow line, where is that going to develop? And depending on where that develops, can really eat into our snow totals. Going back to 2005 now, making our way through the mid-2000s, January 22nd to the 24th, where we saw a pretty incredible snowstorm. I can vividly remember being snowed in at my grandparents' house in Northwest Rhode Island for this one. But to see snow totals 2 to 3 feet in eastern Massachusetts down to the Cape and Islands, from Cape Elizabeth all the way down, Cape Ann all the way down to Cape Cod, seeing over 30 inches of snow, it's pretty incredible, because that's, time after time you see the lower snow amounts down towards the Cape and Islands, but this was quite the inverse there. So this blizzard dumped anywhere from 1 to 3 feet, hurricane force winds producing 6-foot drifts, and those temperatures, they were bitterly cold. Plymouth, 38 inches of snow for you. Cambridge, Mass, 30 inches. Blue Hill, 19 inches. You get the story. And those peak wind gusts, you can see them down in the bottom left-hand corner. Nantucket, 84 miles an hour. And, nothing to really, think of, but still, very strong wind gusts were associated with this storm, giving us those blizzard-like conditions. You can see the people down at the bottom of your screen in Boston and Plymouth and Cape Cod really buried deep in all of that snow. All right, looking at this forecast discussion, it was really interesting to see the blizzard of 2005 was the first blizzard since the blizzard of 1997, which was the April Fool's Day blizzard we'll talk about in a little bit. In the forecast discussion, our forecasters were comparing this blizzard to the blizzard of 78. The biggest difference was that we weren't really worried about that coastal flooding compared to the blizzard of 1978, which caused historical flooding, and the duration was actually limited compared to the blizzard of 78. Plymouth County, you really raked in those snow totals. You can see in the bottom part of your screen, bottom left, you see anywhere from about 2 feet up to 3 feet of snow throughout Plymouth County, and the winds, nothing to really sneeze at either. Look at that, Sandwich, 83 miles an hour. Martha's Vineyard, 59 miles an hour there. Nantucket, 84 miles an hour. So we had the wind, we had the snow, all the conditions were there to give us the blizzard. Now, similar to the last map that we were showing, the 500 millibar heights versus the low on the surface map, they're not on top of each other. They're a little bit closer, but not by much. So not a vertically stacked system. We're looking at a fairly robust storm as it's moving up towards the north and east. But look at those blue lines that are dashed. That is where the freezing line is. And where the low is located, it's just inside the benchmark, which really doesn't always mean. So when the low runs inside, typically it isn't a blockbuster snowstorm for us. It's typically something for northern New England. But because there was so much cold air in place, we were able to really ring in all of that snow. Now, looking at our forecast discussion, we were talking about the hurricane force winds a few days in advance, which kind of gave us gave that lead time to prepare for the winds and give all of our partners the ability to see that we were going to have the strong winds and prepare for those blizzard-like conditions, especially in Eastern Mass and for Cape Cod and the islands. Now, I'm going to let Joe talk about this because wall drag is way before my time. And from what I've been told, Joe, you say that he was pretty, everybody knew his AFDs and he had quite a following.
Yeah, Tori, for those who have been, following our discussions for a while, wall drag's kind of a legend, and I think Kevin will kind of agree with me there. He was always fun to work with, and whenever there was a big storm, he was all over it, and you'd have multiple forecast discussions coming out throughout the day, sometimes 5 or 6 in one 8-hour shift. But he really had a good sense for nailing these really big events and really, had a good awareness of them on the models several days out. So, when Walt was starting to ramp up for a storm, you kind of knew, you were going to get clobbered. So here's an example. This was a little bit before. And you can see, probable top 10 snowstorm blizzard, coming in. And he was absolutely right. But if you look at, the nice thing about Walt's discussions too is he's also talking about what's happening, upstream. So that second or third paragraph there below, talking about thunder in the DC area, possible signature of developing gravity wave. That just means there's a highly energetic system. And in fact, we did have thunder snow with this as well. So, he was a forecaster, and I try to tell our staff too, don't always get locked into all the model guidance. Take a look at what's going on, especially upstream, like if there's a storm coming from the Carolinas. What's happening down there? Where's the rain snow line? Is there thunder? Are there big pressure falls? Things that can really kind of juice up the system as it heads up here to New England. So, some of you, if you've been reading our discussions for a while, you probably remember Walt. He left our office, went to the Philadelphia Mount Holly office after that for several years, and now he's retired and kind of enjoying life outside, but still, keeps track of the weather, and I still hear from him occasionally too. So I just thought I'd throw that in because I know we have a lot of fans of Walt from when he was here at the Boston office, Tori.
All right, Joe, thanks for that. All right, I think we can advance on to my final slide. We're going to talk about the April Fool's Day storm of 1997. And for me, this was probably one of the biggest snowstorms of my memory as a young child. I was almost 7 years old at the time. And I remember, the whole power outages, being stuck inside, cooking on the wood stove. It was quite a memorable snowstorm event. Much of southern New England getting anywhere from 10 to 20 inches of snow. But really, the higher totals were up in northern Rhode Island, actually where I grew up in Burrillville, all the way through Worcester County, and then up towards the Boston area, getting that 20 to 30 inch accumulation worth of snow. So let's head on to our next slide. We're talking a few days out. The office was able to pretty much lock in that there was going to be a snowstorm, but it was a few more days before we were able to talk about a possibility of a major snowstorm, which definitely for the end of March, early April, it's not out of the question. But to get a blizzard this late in the game, it's quite an incredible thing. So you can see here our forecasters were talking about the significant storm off southern New England and mid-Atlantic and how it was going to be moving into our area. But still, for this time of year, they were hesitating to even talk about the mention of accumulation. So definitely interesting to see nonetheless. So here we're looking at the surface map from the morning of March 31st. This is 7 a.m. Across southern New England, we were talking temperatures in the low 40s and rain. So waking up that day as a young child, not following the weather at that point, no thought in my head that we're going to get a large snowstorm to move in within the next day or so. But the low moved off towards the north and east and began to deepen. And as that happened, the low was able to bring in colder air from the north. And as the low was moving past southern New England, it was able to bring in that colder air and turn that heavier rain over into the heavier snow. So if we slide that graphic ahead, you can see as the low was moving off towards the north and east, we had a high coming in from the west, and we were able to really funnel in some colder air from the north and east, and that helped to change over that rain to snow. But also with those tight isobars, you can see that the pressure gradient force had to increase, and with that we got those stronger winds blowing through the area that gave us the high winds that we needed to attain those blizzard-like conditions. And from here, I'm going to pass things over now to Kevin.
All right, Tori, thanks a lot and great job. Good evening, everyone. We'll continue onward with some of the big storms in southern New England history. This one is the blizzard of '96 from January 6th through actually it was through January 8th. This was actually one of the biggest snowstorms for the Middle Atlantic region in terms of expansive area of snowfall. It was anywhere from 2 to 3 feet of snow, widespread from Southwest Virginia all the way into the New York City area. And in fact, I think Philadelphia in this storm, this was their greatest snowfall on record. I think they got about 32 inches of snow. But across southern New England, we didn't do quite as well as they did, but certainly we did quite well with amounts of 1.5 feet to locally up to 2 feet. And actually, some locations actually saw a little more than 2 feet, but it just wasn't as widespread as it was further to the southwest across the Middle Atlantic region. And notice as you head north into northern New England, there was little or no snow that fell. So this was definitely a Middle Atlantic and southern New England snowstorm. Certainly a significant impact for transportation. We had airport closures. Schools were closed for a few days, and certainly a big impact for southern New England. Here you can see some of the snowfall totals across the region. In Connecticut, we had Bradley Airport at 18 inches of snow. Worcester had 14. We had a lot of amounts between 1.5 feet and 2 feet. On the next slide, I think Providence had at T.F. Green Airport had 2 feet of snow. Foster had 2 feet. In Massachusetts, at the office in Taunton, we had 19.3 inches. But the actual jackpot for that storm was out across Plymouth County, anywhere from basically 24 inches in Brockton and up to 29 inches in Norwell. And then finally in Boston, Boston had about 18 inches of snow from that storm. So this was the weather map, 7 o'clock in the morning on the 8th. We were well into the storm. Heavy snow was falling. You can see here we had a pretty intense low pressure down to 980 millibars east of Delaware and Maryland. Heavy snow was falling across the region, but notice the really cold air across northern New England. We had sub-zero temperatures. I see -5 here in Burlington. It was actually down to -20 in Messina. So this storm was able to draw on that cold air and push it southward to ensure that the entire Mid-Atlantic region and even the coast would be all snow from this storm. In fact, you can kind of see in southern New England, Boston's down to 16 degrees with snow. It was quite a cold storm in addition to being a significant a blizzard for the region. So this is actually a 5-day forecast from one of our global models during that time. It was the MRF, and you can see this 5-day forecast was not very good. No real indication of a storm for southern New England, just a very weak low, several hundred miles east of New England, with actually high pressure building into the region. So this model out 5 days was just suggesting a nice, tranquil, sunny day in southern New England. But notice the European model. This is 6 days out, just a remarkable accuracy. Pretty much pinned this storm 6 days out. Is showing a significant low pressure off the Mid-Atlantic coast with a high pressure, cold high pressure to the north, certainly showing the potential 6 days out of a significant winter storm for the Mid-Atlantic and southern New England. And the next slide is model forecast from the UK Met model. Not as good as the European, but still showing that potential snowstorm with low off the coast, a little further offshore, but certainly for a 6-day forecast back in the mid-90s, that's pretty good. So the challenge that the forecasters in the Boston office had was that at that time, we only had limited data available from the European and UK Met, and we relied very, very heavily on the U.S. models. And the U.S. models for this storm, they were playing catch-up. They were definitely too far south and east with the storm. Initially, it was showing a virtual miss for the area, but as we drew closer to the event, the models did trend northward, and certainly, by Friday, a couple of days before the storm, we were talking about maybe the Cape and Islands and the South Coast could be on the fringe of the storm for Sunday night. And then as we went one day further, that northward trend continued. We were discussing snowfall amounts potentially up to 1 foot on the Cape and Islands. And certainly by Sunday, that northward trend continued, and we were pretty much in the crosshairs of that storm. But it took several days for the U.S. models to catch up for this event. So the next storm was the December 12th, 92 nor'easter. We don't talk about this storm too much, but this was actually one of the fiercest storms to hit New England in terms of snowfall, wind, and destructive coastal flooding. In terms of snowfall, it was pretty much elevation dependent, but very, very prolific amounts. We had up to 4 feet of snow in the Berkshires, at Beckett, Peru. We had over 2.5 feet in Worcester, and around 2 feet of snow in the hills in northern Connecticut, and that actually extended into northwest Rhode Island. We had, in terms of wind gusts, we had hurricane force wind gusts at Boston and Falmouth, but probably one of the more impressive aspects of this storm was the coastal flooding. It was destructive coastal flooding, especially across the Connecticut coast. We had nearly 200 homes damaged, but we also had significant damage on the east coast of Massachusetts and Nantucket with severe beach erosion along all our coastline. And that heavy snow, for the higher elevations, that produced blizzard conditions. We had actually drifts up to 10 feet in the Berkshires, with schools being closed for up to a week, with widespread power outages. So this is the actual snow map for this storm, kind of crude resolution, but it kind of tells the story. You can really make out the higher elevations. We have the 30 inches plus in the Worcester Hills. You see the amounts greater than 2 feet in the Berkshires. In fact, there were areas that got up to 4 feet. And you actually can make out the Catskills, up to 3 feet of snow in the Catskills. But what was one of the more impressive aspects of this was the actual snowfall gradient. When you're going from, say, Northwest Rhode Island, which had 2 feet plus, to the South Coast, which actually had almost no snow at all. And actually, I was working in Providence at the time, and we had about 3 or 4 inches in Providence. And you only had to drive about 10 miles north of Providence, and you had snowfall of 18 to 24 inches. Pretty remarkable snowfall gradient, something that you don't see too often. So this was the weather map from 7 a.m. on the 11th through 7 p.m. on the 11th. So you can kind of see a very slow-moving storm, fairly strong storm. 990, 988 millibars, and then 992 at 7 p.m. tucked in across eastern Maryland. And we had high pressure to the north, so that resulted in a very, very strong pressure gradient across southern New England with a very long easterly fetch, which helped to pile that water up and produce the significant coastal flooding that occurred along the east coast of Massachusetts, but also along the Connecticut coast as that water got piled up in Long Island Sound. Now, so here's the forecast discussion from 2 days before, and even back then in the early 90s, pretty well forecast event. We were mentioning impacts from high winds, coastal flooding, and significant snowfall. So we pretty much the forecasters at that time pretty much nailed the 3 main impacts from this storm. So the next event is what we like to call the perfect storm. This was the storm from October 30th and 31st in 1991. This storm was probably one of the highest impact coastal flood events from an extratropical cyclone that the east coast of Massachusetts has ever seen, probably only surpassed by the blizzard of '78. Just destructive flooding, homes just ripped off their foundation, some homes destroyed. You can kind of see the pictures there on the top in Situate. We had peak winds from this storm of 78 miles an hour in Falmouth, a nearly 5-foot storm surge in Boston, 30-foot seas at Boston Buoy. That's about pretty much as high as you will see seas in Boston Buoy. And actually, further east from Boston Buoy, out in the open Atlantic, out across Georges Bank, we actually had like 50 to 60-foot seas. And so you can imagine with all that easterly fetch, all that water piling up and that wave action, it produced significant damage, over 100 homes destroyed along the east coast of Massachusetts. So this was the weather map from 0Z on the 30th. So that would have been the evening of the 29th. So a day or two before the peak impact of this storm. And how this got the evolution of this event actually started from a hurricane. We had a Hurricane Grace that was out east of the Bahamas. And the circulation of that hurricane was actually absorbed into this ocean storm that was well out in the open Atlantic. They essentially merged and produced this intense extratropical cyclone, well south here of Nova Scotia. But equally as important, you can kind of see to the north, we have that very, very strong high pressure, a 1044 millibar high in late October. That's pretty anomalous. And so the pressure difference between the storm over the ocean and that high pressure resulted in a tremendous pressure gradient. But more importantly, look at that fetch. You literally had about 1,000 miles of easterly fetch over the open Atlantic that just piled those waves right into the eastern Massachusetts coast. So, 30-foot seas at Boston Harbor and near hurricane force winds. It was really just a destructive coastal flood event, really only surpassed by the blizzard of '78. And here you can kind of see some of the photos. This is from the Gloucester Times. Just total destruction. Homes ripped off their foundation. Complete and total destruction. And this was quite common there along the east coast of Massachusetts. And some more photos from the Vineyard Gazette showing the extent of coastal flooding, on the Cape and the islands. And so this was the forecast discussion back then, and even, this was on Tuesday, a couple of days before the event, we were talking about a dangerous ocean storm, probably one of the worst since the blizzard of '78. So, those are pretty strong words. Back then, you're talking about almost 30 years ago, we were already comparing this storm to the blizzard of '78 in terms of a coastal impact. So, a very, very well forecast event. And here are some of the weather observations, actual weather observations taken at Nantucket on the 30th. You kind of see we had several hours of gusts 50 knots during that event, and certainly we had stronger gusts elsewhere. And then I'll wrap up my my section with the blizzard of '78. We got to save, for me anyway, I have to save the best for last. The great blizzard of '78 from February 6th and 7th. I was just a young child at that time, but this is really the storm that piqued my interest in weather and really got me on my path to meteorology. I mean, without this storm, I might not be doing what I'm doing right now. But this, I was, I think, 10 years old at the time. And I remember this storm vividly. This is the greatest snowstorm I've ever seen. And I think for many, at least for the I-95 corridor, this is certainly the what we refer to as the benchmark of all winter storms. We had basically widespread 2 to 3 feet of snow along the I-95 corridor from Boston to Providence, with some amounts of 3 to 4 feet from northern Rhode Island across interior eastern Massachusetts. But that didn't tell the whole story. We had hurricane force wind gusts combined with that heavy snow, and you take 2 to 4 feet of snow with 80 to 90 mile an hour winds. This was a truly crippling blizzard. This just completely shut down the entire region. I mean, travel was non-existent. Businesses were closed for literally over a week. I mean, just the world basically stopped in southern New England for over a week. We needed the National Guard to dig us out. And quite an impressive storm, but equally as impressive was the coastal flooding. Just complete devastation and destruction along the eastern Massachusetts coast over 4 high tide cycles. I mean, this was a very slow-moving storm. It kind of became stationary for for a period of time, and it just battered the coast for 4 high tide cycles. Just truly devastating coastal flooding. So here are some of the, on the left are the actual weather observations that were taken at Logan Airport on the 7th. So that was the second day of the storm. So just pretty much nonstop heavy snow. And on the right, this is the daily max min and precip and snowfall from one of our cooperative observers in Norton. This is for the month of February. So it might be hard to make it out, but if you look, on the 6th and 7th, you can kind of see on the maybe the 4th and 5th column. On February 6th, they recorded 21.5 inches of snow, and then on the 7th, 17.5 inches, for a total of 39 inches of snow. Just pretty remarkable, and equally impressive is the actual liquid equivalent, 2.5 and 1.2. Looks like about 3 3/4 inches of liquid precip, almost 4 inches of precip, falling as all snow. Just a remarkable storm. But one other aspect I'd like to show on this sheet here is, notice that the only measurable precipitation that occurred in the entire month of February was that blizzard, February 6th and 7th. We had a couple of days of traces, but other than that, it was totally dry. So this was truly like a pattern buster. I mean, we had that just an epic, a blizzard of epic proportions on the 6th and 7th, and then basically, barely a drop of rain or snow for the rest of the month. So certainly a pattern buster. So here's here's kind of what Route 128 looked like a day or two after the storm. Just really remarkable. Just line of cars for miles and miles, just completely stranded in the heavy snow. I mean, this was a common occurrence across all the interstates. I mean, Route 128, 95, 195. It was just a string of cars, literally for miles and miles, that were completely stranded. And in the photo on the right, we had Providence as the storm was ramping up. You can kind of really see the heavy snow falling and the really low visibility. And the next photo is some pictures taken in Providence and on 95 during the storm. Again, it shows the impact of travel from this storm. And just these cars completely trapped, going nowhere in the heavy snow. And you can see the photo on the right. You can see how deep that snow is, and nobody's going anywhere. It's just was complete gridlock. People had to abandon their cars. You had no way. You weren't going anywhere. It was just a tremendous impact for travel and commerce. And here are some of the photos from the coastal flooding, the destruction in Scituate. You can kind of see just homes destroyed, and this is just a snapshot of a few homes in Scituate. This was pretty much common across the entire east coast of Massachusetts. It was pretty devastating from a coastal flood impact. And finally, some information on this blizzard. This storm was actually really forecast quite well by the models several days in advance. We actually had a winter storm watch out 30 hours in advance. We had warnings issued the morning before the snow had begun, and we actually mentioned blizzard conditions 15 hours in advance. The problem was that the timing was off. The storm was delayed. The storm was supposed to come in Sunday night, so that when people woke up Monday morning, we were going to be in heavy snow. But what happened was Monday morning, it was dry. In fact, the sun was actually dimly visible. So people were thinking that it was another forecast bust, because the month before, we had a couple of storms that were not very well forecast. So I think people just assumed when they woke up Monday morning expecting heavy snow, they're thinking, well, this is going to be a forecast bust. I'm just going to go to work. And everybody went to work. And the heavy snow came in like a wall late that morning into the early afternoon. So when the snow started picking up in intensity, everybody decided to go home. And that's just a bad combination. When you bring all that traffic onto the roads with snowfall rates of 3 to 4 inches an hour, and that was 3 to 4 inches an hour for several hours, that's just a recipe for disaster. It only takes, a few cars getting stuck, and basically, within an hour or two, roads pretty much become impassable, especially when, road crews can't plow the roads because they're stuck as well. So you have, 3 to 4 inch an hour snowfall rates and all that traffic, and you're at a virtual standstill, and, people had to basically abandon their cars. It was truly a life-threatening blizzard, a life-threatening situation for Southern New England. And I guess that wraps up my section. With that, I'll turn it over to Joe.
Okay, thanks, Kevin, and a great perspective from that storm. I was actually growing up in New York City and had about 2 feet of snow there. It was still a pretty big blizzard, but down there the snow started early in the morning, so everybody just stayed home and didn't get out like what happened up here. So let's go way back to finish up. I'm guessing no one will really remember this one other than from the history books. This was the Great Blizzard of 1888, which was really one of the largest, snowstorms on record for New England. It was in March too, a little bit later in the season, but you can see, widespread snowfall totals, 2 to 3 feet plus. North Adams, 40 inches, Middleton, Connecticut, 50 inches, even into Vermont, 4 feet of snow across much of the area. The storm, unfortunately, over 400 fatalities, 200 of those in New York City. This was a storm that came on very suddenly. It started out as rain and then turned quickly over to snow with 50-mile-per-hour winds and blizzard conditions, and temperatures plummeted into the single digits. It might be a little bit hard to see here on this map, but on the left, the low is sitting off the New Jersey coast, and over southern New England that morning, temperatures were in the mid-30s, so it was actually rather warm. There was rain with the wind coming off the coast. But to the west, temperatures, it might be hard to see, but I can describe them for you. Temperatures in the teens, moving in from upstate New York, and it's 20 in Albany. So the cold air was rushing in behind the storm, and that's what caused such a quick change to snow, especially New York City and on into southern New England. And it's, as it says here, it stalled off the Atlantic coast, where actually very little snow fell across southeast Mass. It was more across the interior, as you can see here, almost nothing south of Boston, to Providence. So this really was an interior storm, but it was a combination of all that moisture coming in off the Atlantic with rapidly dropping temperatures on the other side of that front that caused blizzard conditions across much of that region. It was also known as the Great White Hurricane. Being in the late 1800s, forecasts weren't kind of what they are today. Poorly forecast, caught many people off guard. Forecasts for the entire region were for rain, possibly changing to snow, but really no one was prepared. And it paralyzed the East Coast from all the way down the Chesapeake Bay up to Maine. You can see on this map that based on the circulation of the storm, it tracked pretty close to Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard, which means, normally we would see very little in the way of snow from Boston to Providence and points south, and the heavy snow would be displaced inland. But you can see in the circulation of this storm, really the cold air was drawn all the way down into the mid-Atlantic too. This Arctic air that was across upstate New York and Pennsylvania just plunged right on down and caused a change to snow. We were able to dig up a few pictures too. This is courtesy of ConnecticutHistory.org. Some pictures from Connecticut, Hartford, New Haven, and Bridgeport. You can see that's quite a bit of snow, even by today's standards, with a tunnel there that someone had formed in Bridgeport. In Massachusetts, courtesy of the Boston Public Library and Forbes Library, you can see Northampton, someone else dug out a tunnel to get through. And even downtown Boston, looks like some of the trolleys were stranded there in snow drifts. Those are pretty impressive snow drifts, too, up to the fronts and entrances to buildings. And it was actually from Yankee Magazine, we were able to find this. There was actually a whole article on the storm. It talked about, how it looked outside. You can see this, locomotive was no match for the deep snow. This is in Naugatuck, Connecticut. And in fact, some articles describing the New York City area, trains were brought to a standstill as well. But, look at this snowfall map. You can just see how widespread this storm was. Even Boston ended up with a foot at the end, and Providence 8, Block Island 6, Nantucket only 2 inches, and that makes sense with the storm going there. But it shows New Haven at 45, Hartford 36, Pittsfield 36, Albany 47, Saratoga Springs 50, and even 21 in New York City, 32 in White Plains. So this was a widespread, devastating blizzard, and especially for the late 1800s. Not a lot of the modern amenities that we have today. This really, caused a lot of havoc for the residents, especially because it was unexpected. Okay, so let's quickly go through some honorable mentions, and then we'll go ahead and answer your questions or maybe feature some of your comments here. Just to briefly go some of these, Snowtober of 2011. I think many people remember this. This was really the only big snowfall of the 2011-2012 season. It's also known as the Halloween nor'easter. Again, it was an interior snow like most early or late season storms, very little along the coast, but you can see the axis here from northern New Jersey and the Catskills over in toward the Berkshires and into the mountains of Vermont and New Hampshire. In the Boston area, the highest total was 25.6 in Worthington, Mass, out in western Massachusetts. And this caused obviously a lot in the way of power disruption. Many of the trees still had leaves on them. So there were, especially in Connecticut, there were widespread power outages from this storm. Then we go on to the superstorm of 1993. I'm sure some of you remember this one. This was March 12th to 14th. This was one of the strongest non-tropical systems ever recorded in the eastern U.S., damaging winds and heavy snow and blizzards all the way from Georgia and Alabama up through western New England. There were 15 tornadoes reported as the storm crossed the Gulf Coast into Florida. Now for us, coastal flooding was averted due to a wind shift early Sunday morning. So that wind shift offshore really prevented much worse coastal flooding from occurring. Otherwise, there would have been quite a bit of damage along the south coast. Snow drifts up to 5 feet across central and western Massachusetts. And you can see the axis of heaviest snow from this storm really was across the Appalachians into upstate New York and into northern Vermont and I know I've told Kevin this story. I was working at the Binghamton, New York office during the storm, and I showed up for work at 6 in the morning on Saturday, and I left the office at 2 p.m. on Sunday. I worked straight through with 2 other people because there was no way we were getting home or getting anyone else into the office. But it was a fun one. We had about 2 feet of snow in there, and it was just incredible heavy snow for hours on end. Through the night, Saturday night into Sunday morning. Some of the snowfall totals here, over a foot in Boston, Providence 10, about 15 in Hartford, and 20 in Worcester. So again, that axis really was across interior northern New England back down into the Appalachians, but the widespread, significant snowstorm. And this one actually was the first time blizzard warnings were issued up to 2 days in advance for that storm across upstate New York. Let me go back to 1983. This was the megalopolitan storm, and I remember this one growing up. I think Kevin might remember this too. For the New York City area, this was one of the most severe blizzards I experienced. About 2 feet of snow, and temperatures tumbled down into the teens and single digits. I remember seeing snowfall. I was measuring the snowfall at the time, and 3 to 4 inches per hour. It was pretty impressive. But this dumped heavy snow all the way from Virginia through the mid-Atlantic into southeast New York, Connecticut, and to southern New England. All-time 24-hour snowfall records set in Allentown and Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And Bradley reported 5 inches of snow in 1 hour from this storm. This was truly one of the more impactful storms to affect the Northeast Corridor. This was February 10th to 12th of 1983. Then we go back to 1982. This was the Northeast blizzard that occurred in April, so even later than the April Fool's storm of 1997. This was a system where we had high pressure over central Canada with unseasonably cold air. Low pressure emerged from the Gulf Coast to the Ohio Valley and developed, again, off the mid-Atlantic coast and tracked on to the Northeast, and that's what gives us our heavier snows. You can see the axis was from the Poconos into the Catskills and much of interior New England, but even coastal areas fared out pretty well. Boston with 13 inches, Providence just shy of 8. Not too bad. And this single snowstorm put April 1982 as one of the top 5 snowiest Aprils on record for the 4 major climate sites. That includes Boston, Worcester, Providence, and Hartford, as well as Blue Hill Observatory in Milton. So some of you may remember this late season blizzard in 1982. Then, of course, we go into May, and there was some talk of this last year with the May snows that we had in 2020, but not to this effect. This was really an unrelenting winter in 1977, and it's still the latest measurable snowfall recorded in Boston, Hartford, and Providence, as you can see some of the totals there. Again, a late season event usually favors higher terrain, not always, but in this case it did. You can see Worcester and Plainfield did pretty well. Boston just half an inch at Logan, but Providence at 7 inches wasn't too shabby. 4 to 6 inches in much of the central areas, even light snow to the south coast. Many people lost electric service and power. Extensive tree and power line damage because at this point most of the trees had blossomed and had leaves. There were also high winds, and many boats were blown from their moorings. Some people wanted to get the boats out early for the season. Had issues with that, and just the second time in weather records that measurable snow depth was recorded in Boston during May, the other one being 0.9 in 1938. So this was one that many of you probably will remember if you've been around a while. This was May of 1977. So with that, that's a look at our top 10 and then a little bit more of our major southern New England storms. So with that, I'm going to call Kevin and Tori back in, and let's go through some of the questions here, and what I'll do is I'll read them and hand them off to whoever covered that section. Let's see, from Dave, he's excited for this, and excellent, good, we're glad you enjoy it. Let's see, from Joe, this was the January 2018 storm. When he was forecasting, so the model's getting down to the low 950s millibar. It was that kind of storm I stayed up to 1 a.m. to see the Euro, and we know many folks who like to follow the models online will stay up late when there's a snowstorm to kind of see that latest guidance. This was also the storm where you saw the video of the dumpsters floating down through downtown Boston from the rush of the coastal flooding and the ice flows too. From Ron, this is about yesterday's storm. The Hartford Current reported it was an indication of climate change. Well, You can't, Ron, you can't really connect one particular storm to climate change. What you have to do is look over a longer period of time. And that's something more where the climatologists get into. It's more into their realm, not so much of us as meteorologists, but a single event does not, you can't relate it to climate change, but if you study a pattern over time, then that's certainly, more valid. So you really need to look at maybe 10, 20, 30, even more, years beyond that to link something to climate change. So we look at periods of activity. So you really just can't, cause one weather effect, whether it be an Arctic outbreak or a hurricane or a tornado outbreak, to climate change. But certainly, the trend is there here in New England for, warmer temperatures, more frequent heavy precipitation events, and that means ones that produce more than a half inch or an inch of precipitation, and rising sea levels. We know that those are kind of happening. So as far as the climate change for that, we'll just kind of have to see how things go over a number of years. Let's see, as I go through, let's see, Jonathan, and good to see you, Jonathan. 2013, I had to read the discussion twice because I couldn't believe what I was reading. Walt used to front me weather maps and data for presentations before the internet. Yes, Walt was always good at sharing things too, which is great. From Mike, let's see, a kind of similar question to the global or the climate change. Anecdotally, it seems that except for the blizzard of 1888, the majority of historic storms have occurred in the last 40 years. Is this related to global warming, changes in measurement methods, media coverage, or some other factors? I don't know, Kevin, you want to take a stab at that? I don't want to answer all the questions here.
Yeah, what was that? Can you repeat that again, Joe?
Sure. So it says, except for the blizzard of 1888, the majority of historic storms have occurred in the last 40 years. Is this related to global warming or climate change, changes in measurement methods, media coverage, or some other factors? What do you think? Probably more of a personal opinion question.
I think it's probably a combination of a lot of things. Obviously, back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, these storms weren't covered. You didn't have internet. And so you're not sure of how impactful those storms were. And obviously, as we get on into the last 20 years or so, every big storm is magnified. So it's probably a combination of the fact that back decades ago these storms didn't get the coverage that they do now.
Okay, yeah, I think that's pretty reasonable, Kevin. Sounds good. Let's see, from Fred, a comment. Favorite one is the April Fool's Day blizzard in 1997. The snow was so wet it felt like wet cotton candy, and that's true. And I remember it was a pain to shovel. So that was a tough one to dig out from. That was a good 2 feet of snow where I was. So let's see. Oh, from Stephen, any comments on yesterday's storm? Well, yeah, actually, Stephen, we're working on a review of that right now, and we hope to have that presented sometime, probably next week. I think we're aiming for the end of next week, maybe Thursday the 11th. So stay tuned from that. That storm, the forecast worked out pretty well. The only issue we had was right along the coast, where we had that coastal front move pretty far inland, and areas from Gloucester, Cape Ann, down through Boston to the South Shore, and of course the Cape Ann Islands changed over to rain a little bit earlier than anticipated. So, that was the area where the totals were overdone. But I think overall, for the interior, it was a pretty well forecast storm. We had 12 to 18 inch totals forecast. That's pretty much what happened out toward Worcester County with this particular storm. And of course, a lot more snow fell across northern New Jersey, where they were in excess of 25 inches of snow. So, if you're interested in that particular storm, we should have that review ready for everyone with a webinar on the 11th, a week from Thursday. So look for that on our webinar schedule on our webpage or social media. We should be making that announcement soon. That'll be a good one. Let's see, from Alexander, during the snow blitz, my recollection is that those storms weren't actually that strong, and the precip output was not that impressive, but it was so cold that the snow to liquid ratio was exceptionally high and was very dry, fluffy snow. Is that right? Kevin, you can probably back me up on this because you worked, I think, a whole stretch of these. It was. We actually ended up below average precipitation for the winter, but obviously record amounts of snowfall, especially in eastern Massachusetts. So we ended up with a bit of a precipitation deficit, but it was so cold that those snow to liquid ratios were very high and produced more in the way of snowfall. So, Kevin, I'll let you make any more comment on that.
Yeah, I completely agree, Joe. In fact, the month of February that year was the second coldest month on record, actually missing out on the coldest month by like 1/10 of a degree. So, in terms of temperatures, extremely cold and snowy month. So, snow to liquid ratios are quite high. And from what I remember, I think the first storm of that blitz, the late January storm, that was a pretty significant storm. I think it was fairly deep system, and then the other one was the Valentine's Day storm, the 14th and 15th. That had a really strong upper level energy pocket that came down. We had some vigorous dynamics with that produced the blizzard conditions. The morning, I think it was like actually Sunday morning. It was from what I remember, was a two-part storm. We had, a shot of snow on a Saturday afternoon, and it actually cleared out, and then we got a second round during the overnight and morning, and that it was that second round that produced the blizzard conditions. But I think the two storms in between were not, really impressive from a surface standpoint in terms of sea level surface pressure. I think it was really the first storm, the late January storm, and then the Valentine's Day storm that were the strongest of the two. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Now I'm going to pass the next one to Tori because we got to hear from him. From Dylan, and this is probably personal opinion. Any predictions for the latter part of the winter? What do you think, Tori?
Oh boy, give me the fully loaded question, I think. I think it's more or less on a personal kind of basis at this point. I haven't actually in the past week looked at the extended with the Climate Prediction Center. I'm not sure if Joe or Kevin has at this point, but that's what I would kind of at this point go off of is what the Climate Prediction Center is kind of forecasting in terms of, are we going to be above or below average for precip and temperatures, and kind of go from there to start off. I'm not sure if one of you guys want to weigh in on that as well.
Kevin, you want to take a stab?
Yeah, I think the teleconnections kind of favor a stormy, relatively stormy pattern for the next 2 to 3 weeks. I mean, beyond that, I think it's kind of tough to take a stab at trying to forecast weather patterns beyond 3 weeks. But I think teleconnection wise, the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think it's going to favor some stormy weather. Whether or not that's going to translate into more snow, or if the storms end up cutting closer to the coast and gives the coastal areas rain, or whether they end up being further offshore, I don't think we can say. But I think we have certainly potential for some stormy weather the next 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, I agree, Kevin. And Jonathan also put a note in there that the AO, the Arctic Oscillation, and the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, are forecast to remain negative through mid-February. So that's one favorable factor the next couple of weeks. So we'll see. I'll give this one to Kevin because it's a Blizzard of 78 question from John. What factors led to the Blizzard of 78 stalling out?
Well, I believe that we had a really impressive jet max digging that kind of cut the storm off to the south. So basically it basically became vertically stacked. So initially this was a classic Miller B storm where you had tremendous energy dropping southeast from the Great Lakes, and it resulted in redevelopment off the mid-Atlantic coast, and that storm rapidly deepened as it got south of Long Island, and it was actually captured by that upper level energy, and it just stalled for about a period of 12 to 18 hours before it finally lifted out. So it just the tremendous energy from the Great Lakes system that kind of merged over it and allowed it to become vertically stacked.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. And one last one from Mike. It's a comment, but I recall a monstrous snowstorm in late February 1969, depths of around 3+ feet where I lived in Essex County. Strong winds produced drifts of 5 to 10 feet, I remember. I think Pinkham Notch in New Hampshire got almost 8 feet. Seems worse than some of the later storms in the list. Yeah, there were some storms in February of '69. That might have been the 100-hour storm that produced those totals. I didn't have too much information I could dig up on that, unfortunately. So, we didn't include every single thing, but yeah, that would have been what. Maybe we'll look at that. That's also actually is in our Southern England weather events from the 1960s. If you go back to the YouTube channel, there's a little bit of a review on that, a mention of it anyway. But yeah, we had to kind of narrow down the list, Mike, so we didn't get to include every single one. But that 100-hour storm certainly was a prolific snow producer, especially up in that neck of the woods.